You can start, sir.
Dubey sir, you can start right now, sir. Dubey sir, unmute and start, please. Dubey sir, please unmute first and then start. Please unmute Dubey sir first.
Okay, I was not able to do that. But anyway, thank you.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back this Sunday again. And the speaker this morning is Dr. Vikas Baniwal. I want to extend a very warm welcome to Dr. Baniwal and also thank him profusely for accepting our invitation to come to this group this morning and deliver a talk. Dr. Baniwal is going to talk on engaging with Krishnamurti's ideas in higher education. Many of you would not be knowing Dr. Baniwal, so I'll briefly introduce him. Dr. Vikas Baniwal is currently serving in the capacity of an assistant professor at the Department of Education, University of Delhi. He has been a general fellow for his postdoctoral work at the Indian Council of Philosophical Research. He completed his doctoral studies at the University of Delhi in education in 2015. Overall, he has about 12 years experience in school teaching and also teaching in higher education, research, and administration. He has many publications to his credit, and his key research interests include intersubjectivity, dialogue, inclusion, mental health, talking about self, and identity. With these words, I welcome Dr. Baniwal once again and thank him once again for being with us. So you can take as much time as you want, but normally we allow the speakers to have their discourse for an hour and then leave about 25-30 minutes for the participant to ask questions. So it's all yours now, Dr. Baniwal.
Thank you very much, sir. I generally don't read papers or have a presentation when I talk about Krishnamurti ji's ideas, and also I feel so humbled and overwhelmed with people who have met him, who have lived his ideas and maybe followed his teachings for such a long time. So it's very rare to have met a community of practitioners who read and discuss and live Krishnamurti. So thank you very much for inviting me here. So I would really appreciate if you could ask your questions in between also. So for example, if I'm talking about something and there is a curiosity, please do ask, because I don't know what kind of discussions you all have or what's important for you to discuss these days. I had this idea that I don't know how relevant what I'm going to say is going to be for you all. So your questions will help me focus on the relevant ideas and not focus on the peripheral things. So thank you very much, sir. So, I should share something in more autobiographical way. It's also meant as a caveat to what kind of discussions I can have and how I approach Krishnamurti and how I have engaged him in the past. So I first got introduced to Krishnamurti's ideas in, I think, 2005. So it's been about 17 years now. I was a young B.Ed student with a lot of passion for teaching, and probably it was this passion for teaching that Krishnamurti's ideas appealed to me. also being brought up and being nurtured in a very traditional atmosphere, Krishnamurti's ideas felt revolutionary at some level. So especially the cultural context in which I have grown up. So I belong to a Jat community, and Jats, just to give a context. So our culture is quite close to Haryana's culture. So there is patriarchy at home. There is a lot of expectation about revering the adults, obeying the adults. There is a lot of emphasis on duty as an ethic. There is a lot of emphasis on, my father was in banks. There is a lot of emphasis on what are you putting in, what is your investment, and what are the returns. So often while growing up, whenever I asked that, can I do it? Isse kya hoga? What would happen? What would you get out of it? So a very functional, utility-oriented approach. And I had done ET before that, before my BEd. ET is elementary teacher education, where we are prepared to be primary teachers. I don't think anything changed in me during that course. Then I did my graduation. So it was like there is me going through these courses with no impact of these courses on who I am. So truly, as Freire would put it, banking kind of knowledge, where all the knowledge, all the information that we are gaining, it's being stored, and retrieved whenever necessary. So after this sort of life, when you get encountered with Krishnamurti's ideas, I think it's both shattering. It shatters your way of being, and it's challenging, because when you start appreciating someone's ideas, then that appreciation entails a certain kind of responsibility. Okay, so if you like these ideas, why don't you live them? So that sort of answerability even to ideas, I felt. So and probably that was the first time when I really started questioning things. I might have reacted in the past. So my father wanted me to take commerce because he thought he would teach me. So as a reaction, I took up science so that he couldn't teach me, and other such decisions. So anything to do with him getting involved in my things, I would react and choose the other way, with no other rationale, absolutely none. So so with Krishnamurti, what I found was that questions have power. So that was the first thing that I realized. And yes, of course, when you question, then there is resistance, then there is a backlash, then there is a counter pressure. But for me, Krishnamurti's ideas had, I wouldn't say answers, but yes, pointers for everything that I was feeling. So whenever I felt something, I could always go back to Krishnamurti's writings, and there would be some pointer or the other to help me resolve my own conflict, my own dilemma, my own predicament. So in that 1 year from 2005 to 2004 to 2005, when I was a student, it was a great time for me to change. And that was the first time when I actually started collecting books. I never had a library. In our culture, library is useless. So what you have is uh, a collection of textbooks that you dispose of after the course ends. So I don't have a single book before 2005. So that was the time when I started valuing ideas and engaging with ideas in a way that probably, as Krishnamurti would put it, make them your own. Don't just read them. So that was the time when I reflected on my own inclination towards teaching and inclination towards uh, uh, being in a particular way. Because I feel that human mind has a very strong capability to preserve itself. So no matter which type of conditions you are in, our minds somewhere save the true essence from every negativity from outside. So then I got interested in how the mind works, how we can be better. And then that was also a time when I got interested in psychology. So psychology for me was a way to engage, understand with your own mind, with your own way of being. I got appointed as an assistant professor, as a primary teacher in an MCD school. So that was, I think, the first playground or the first space where I could engage with Krishnamurti's ideas and apply them in my classroom. And that was the first time when I really felt the tension between our education system and Krishnamurti's ideas. One thing which I constantly tried was how can I bring his ideas to the mainstream, with the realization that the mainstream will never be or will never acknowledge Krishnamurti's spirit. Because the structures that we have in the mainstream, the kind of systems that we have, I think they are quite anti-dialogical. They are non-dialogical. If not anti, they are non-dialogical. They are monological. So there has to be an order from the top and accountability response from the bottom. There is no space for answerability here. This is what I'm thinking in terms of these days. The difference between accountability and answerability. So what Krishnamurti demands us is an answerability towards each other. When he says that you are the world, so that's an answerability. That's not accountability. Nobody can hold you accountable that you have made that. So Ukraine is happening because of you. Nobody can say that. But since it is happening, we feel answerable to ourselves, to each other. So then I got into masters in psychology while I was teaching. And my expectations were, that when I would study psychology, I would really understand how the mind works, how we think, why we think. So in a very Krishnamurtian sense, I wanted to, unpack our own ways of working. And then that was totally the opposite. So in my master's in psychology, we got a number of theories, but nothing that could unpack how we go about our everyday lives. It in a way added a layer of concepts to it. And I chose clinical psychology as my specialization. But I could never find, what should I say, a sense of healing that you feel in between Krishnamurti's pauses. I think the greatest Krishnamurti's words lie in those pauses for some reason. So I never read Krishnamurti except when I'm writing an article and where I have to quote his words. I prefer to listen to him. And they make sense somehow. I'm also a student of philosophy. So philosophically, if you read Krishnamurti, is complete contradiction. He would say something at one place, something else at the other place. And he wouldn't follow the rules of logic in that sense. But intuitively, it made sense. He yeah, so the kind of connection that you feel with him, I could never feel it in any, or if I couldn't even find the possibility of it in any theory of clinical psychology. Rogers' humanistic perspective did have some space for it. But I think it is the demand of the modern disciplines to theorize, to create these step-by-step systematic theories which can be worked upon, that takes that spirit away from the from the mechanism. So and that is when I realized the importance of Krishnamurti's method of no method. So moving ahead, I thought of, I started imagining, probably I'll still have that copy of Martin's Introduction to Krishnamurti, where I made notes about how could be a way of counseling based on Krishnamurti's ideas, which is not methodological. So a counseling with no method. And I have I'm talking about 2006 when I had this idea. Now in 2021, last year, we materialized this idea in the form of a paper on philosophical counseling based on Krishnamurti's ideas. So I realized that such a way of counseling couldn't fit in psychological counseling. So I never explored it. But the moment I found philosophical counseling, I felt, yes, this is probably where we can engage with Krishnamurti's ideas and still, in a more conventional sense, make them practically useful. So after my master's in psychology, I started, I left my job actually after that, and I got enrolled in master's in education course. And I must acknowledge this time and again that being a primary teacher was most rewarding and was most frustrating experience that I had. Most rewarding because I could engage with children, and I could see the light in their eyes whenever something compassionate, loving, engaging happened. and frustrating because the school in which I was, where there were 5 teachers and 500 students, uh, this was rarely possible. Uh, so, as a school setting, and I'm talking about Delhi, the capital of the country, I had 120 students enrolled in my class, and 80 used to come, at least 80 every day. And there was a single room, and I mean, it took all my creativity to just ensure that all of them are able to sit on desks and they don't have to sit on floor, and then engaging with them. So, so the demands that Krishnamurti's ideas had, and I felt that demand, almost impossible. But also the strength that they provided, the strength of love, compassion, justice, the quest towards justice. I think that was something that kept me going. So I thought that, me as a primary teacher is just one teacher. And I think I should become a teacher educator, where at least I can inspire, if I'm able to inspire at least one student every year, I think that would be a much more contribution than what I am doing now. So with this aspiration, which itself also sometimes seemed foolish, I shifted to, I left my job and I started my MEd course. Now again, in Masters in Education course, there were so many things about, philosophy of education, sociology of education, psychology of education, and other things, other papers like teacher education, etc. But they were also descriptive in nature. They largely talked about what happens. And also the philosophy of education, or rather philosophies of education that we studied, had no space for Krishnamurti in them. And often I discuss this with my teacher, Dr. Jayshree Mathur. And then she says, because I understand your pain, and I understand the limitations of the discipline also. But yeah, there needs to be, there is a lot that needs to be done. But 1 year is too small a time for that. So yeah, I mean, we had these informal discussions where she guided me, and that also made me feel a little bit confident about the direction of my own engagement. But a major impetus to my engagement with Krishnamurti happened when I joined my PhD the subsequent year. My doctoral work is on dialogue. And the first dialogue that I explored was of Krishnamurti. So what makes dialogue dialogical? What makes a class dialogical? What makes a conversation dialogical? So these were my questions. And along with Krishnamurti, I read Martin Buber, who is a Jewish existentialist, Paulo Freire, whose Christian background is often underplayed, and he's a critical theorist. And of course, David Bohm, along with Krishnamurti, and also Socrates, and other modern scholars. So that was a time when I could bring in Krishnamurti's ideas in a more academic language and share it with others. Often people told me, oh, you are doing your work in philosophy of education. That must be so abstract. I can never understand philosophy. On the other hand, there are people who say, oh, you are doing a library study. Anybody can do that. And I always felt that the truth or my experiences lied in between them. Yes, it is abstract, but I think philosophy, and especially Krishnamurti's words, are meant to be lived, not remembered. And that there is a sort of there is a sort of quest that one has when one tries to live Krishnamurti. And then I understand that it's quite un-Krishnamurtinian to say that you live Krishnamurti. So when I say live Krishnamurti, I have that paradox in mind, that it's not to live as per Krishnamurti or live according to Krishnamurti. So I have that in mind. And he wouldn't want anyone to live as per his words. So that's why I refer to to Krishnamurti's spirit, which I see in terms of freedom, responsibility, questioning, reflecting, dialogue, engagement, relating with people, relating with animals, relating with nature, and doing all this in your own unique way. So theorizing all this is again a very complicated and almost an impossible task, because how can you bring this sort of individualized quest to a theorizing which is meant to be universal? Again, how can you articulate the method of no method? So this has been a major a quest or a challenge rather in writing about Krishnamurti's ideas. So during my doctoral work, I think I learned more about this way, this method of no method, in my engagement, in my interactions with my supervisor, Dr. Jayashree Mathur. Because as a supervisor, when she engaged with me, when she questioned me, there was this implicit how should I put it? There was an implicit understanding that, and which I may not have articulated, that because you believe in Krishnamurti's ideas, and you ought to live them. So in form of whatever I'm doing, is it dialogical or not? That because you said this and this is how you are talking about your work, is it dialogue? And not just about my work. I also became a colleague in her colleague in 2012. I got appointed as assistant professor on ad hoc position. She mentored me because you talked about this in your class. You talked about, so there was time when we talked about power. It's an important concept in our B.Ed class, B.Ed course. So she said, because you talked about power in this way, what do you think Krishnamurti would say about it? What do you think Buber would say about it? So such questions, such pointing at my own teaching, my own writing, her, I think brought in me that coherence between thinking, feeling, and behavior that Krishnamurti would demand. that you do what you feel and you feel what you are doing and what you are thinking. So thinking is not just rational. It has a strong emotional component. Actions are not just out of the need of the role. They have to be more than that. They have to be an expression of who you are. And at that time, I felt that I can't write about Krishnamurti in a way that I can write about, say, Freire and Socrates. That sort of technicality where, when you are asked, how can you apply Krishnamurti's dialogue in a classroom? I felt that no, I can't write about this. How can you apply his dialogue? His dialogue cannot be applied. It can only be lived and experienced. So, so I decided that yes, I would write papers about it, but I would not try to reduce him and his ideas to the mechanics of classrooms. So I did not include Krishnamurti in my PhD thesis. I focused my PhD thesis on Freire, Buber, and Socrates. So Krishnamurti probably at that time was more like this sacred or this elusive person whom I could not capture. And I felt that there is no need to capture. And I still feel so. Then I went to CBSC. I was an assistant director at CBSC in inclusive education. And I could not be far from Krishnamurti anywhere else. And CBSC, Central Board of Secondary Education. I can't imagine a place within education which is farther from from Krishnamurti. I mean, I could not see Krishnamurti even a single line, even in a single meeting at CBSC. I stayed there for about a year, couldn't stay more. I felt so restricted and so frustrated there. So I gave the job up and joined ICPR as postdoctoral fellow. And I still kept questioning, because you were there, people like Krishna Kumar and others also questioned that because you were there, you could have made a difference. And I felt that it's a system where there is no agency. So if there is no agency, then actually there are no questions which are valued. And I find that the beginning of this spirit of Krishnamurti is in questions. So if your questions are not valued, then what can you do? So in my postdoctoral work, which I did at ICPR and JNU, I engaged with dialogue in Martin Buber and Upanishads. Still, I could not think about Krishnamurti in more technical terms. I think Krishnamurti's ideas are not to be included in these technical terms. Then I got appointed as assistant professor in Ambedkar University. So at Ambedkar University, I realized that the importance of classroom. I was going back to a classroom after 2 years. And it was that time that I realized the interpersonal nature of Krishnamurti's teachings and how the influence of Krishnamurti might have happened. And there was this very interesting course called Reading Educational Thinkers, in which there were small groups, about 4 to 5, and used to read and discuss thinkers. And one of the thinkers was Krishnamurti. I think that was something that made me desire a reading group like yours. So I felt that, we can reflect on our own lives better when we do it in a community, when we do it collectively. Otherwise, it's very isolating, very individualistic, and I felt that it wouldn't take us too far. So it was at that time that I valued why Krishnamurti would hold public talks, because that sort of collective input, even though the audience may not be speaking, but that sort of answerability that the speaker has towards the audience, that would bring in different perspectives, that would bring in different questions without asking them. So in my own teaching, I think I have tried to imbibe the spirit of Krishnamurti's words in small ways. So now when I, for example, give assignments, I ask students, what do you want to do? What do you want to work upon? When there are scholars who come to, when scholars come to me for their dissertation work, my first question is to ask them, what is your pain? What do you want to work upon? So if you begin with your pain, then your doctoral work will never be a burden. So I feel that, conventionally, that these divides between personal and public, professional and family, between you as a person, and you as a parent or as a husband versus you as a teacher. I think in Krishnamurti's imagination, these binaries are reducing. They are limiting. So I have created my own room, my own space. I have a room in my department, my office. So I have created it in a way that doesn't feel alienating. Where students would want to sit, discuss, not gossip, but they would want to sit and be there. So I try to avoid the distance that generally we see between teachers and students. So I'm friendly with my students, but not friends. So these small differences, that you are open but not taken for granted. You are flexible but not unprofessional. So I've tried to, and I understand that it's a constant struggle, and there's always a tension when you try to do things different from others. But I think it's my conviction in a world probably that Krishnamurti imagined that keeps me going. Yeah. So so this is how I feel now when talking about Krishnamurti, that he needs to be lived rather than talked about. And in the pandemic, I mean, it was a totally different scenario. Talking to a class where no camera is open, I mean, I never imagined I would have to do that as a teacher when you couldn't see anyone. And uh, in that scenario, I realized the importance of dialogue, classroom dialogue. My classes are all, I never give lectures. They're always in terms of conversations. So I ask a question, then I ask students to respond, and then I build my class on their responses. I felt that this method worked even in online classes. So I've got this feedback from students. I can't say from everyone, because many students just join the class and then they move away, or they go for shopping or whatever, or just sleep. But yeah, you can have some idea about your class by just counting the number of students who are responding. So I think conversations uh, have kept me going even during the pandemic, have kept the spirits up of my classes. And when I took my first class after the pandemic, we recently opened up last week. I think I was so excited to have students in front of me that I was about to break into a dance. So it was very animate conversation, they talking to each other and responding to each other, sitting in a circle. I prefer a circular arrangement for classes. So sitting in circles, looking at each other, talking to each other. I think the power of presence uh, uh, can be felt in those in that face-to-face mode. So, and then that is where I value philosophers like Husserl and others, people who talked about understanding the lived reality, the lived space, the experiential uh, reality, instead of the so I gave them this example. Okay, for that I need to show you something, just a photo, nothing much. So what I asked them to do was, we were talking about the difference between analytical and continental traditions of philosophy. So in analytical tradition, we focus on what do things mean, whereas in continental tradition, we focus on how things feel. So I was talking about this. How would we formulate these questions differently? So, for example, the question of uh, having a class. So, what is a class, and how should a class be organized? So, if a class is organized uh, in say a U shape or O shape, etc., etc., that's one way of answering that question. But if a class is organized in say this way, in this setting, how would it be different? So this is my office, and there is a space to have chairs here, and this is from the other side. So then we have different responses. So a couple of students mentioned that, sir, your office looks like the office of my therapist. So the idea that space and people have their own presence, I think I realized it in my first class after the pandemic. So my general attempt with my students is to highlight these ideas And I think, I must confess here that I have about 10 to 12 copies of Krishnamurti's Reflections on the Self. It's a collection by by Martin, and it's something that I often gift to my students. It has topics like love, loneliness, happiness, anger. So all these list of emotions, and then there is the first chapter is about dialogue. That's called Dialogue, a collection from Krishnamurti's words. So I see that as an introduction to Krishnamurti. And many students have told me later on that, sir, you talked about Krishnamurti at that time and we felt कि हाँ हाँ बड़ी अच्छी बातें हैं सुनने के लिए, but now we realize their importance. So I think this is true for most of us. When we encounter someone as radical as Krishnamurti, it's difficult for us to imagine a space for him in our conventional system. But slowly and gradually, we come to realize its importance, and we also learn to create elbow rooms to uh, to exist in his spirit. I think I would pause here and uh, maybe respond to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Baniwal. I think it was a very interesting journey hearing from you about Krishnamurti's teachings. And I entirely agree with you that the best way to disseminate the teachings is to try and live the teachings. Uh, my next few comments are going to be purely anecdotal. Uh, the last meeting that he had was in November 1985 in Rajghat, and a Buddhist scholar got up and asked him that what will happen to the teachings after you're gone? How will they be disseminated? And he said, it's not my responsibility or the responsibility of the foundations. It's your responsibility. If you live the teachings, people will know about it. And another comment I want to make is, you know, in a residential setup in Krishnamurti schools where the number of students are very small, 12 to 15, maybe 18, 20 in higher classes, Krishnamurti makes it so challenging to go through his teachings while you are dealing with small children who are relatively less conditioned compared to what you must be facing in higher education. That people are, they are totally frustrated and say it's impossible to do it because he ties your hands and legs and then wants you to swim. In Banaras, when people asked him, you have opened so many schools and what do you expect from your children when they pass out from here? And he said, if 5 children from all the schools that I've established can turn their back to money and power, I think the purpose of creating these schools is served. Then the gentleman asked, but how are your children doing when they pass out from your schools and go to the outer world? He said, some of them are disgustingly successful. So for him, it was, the importance lay somewhere else. But let me tell you, I'm very, very happy to hear about your experience in the journey. And in your own way, it must be very challenging to deal with students in the university where they have set ideas and, set goals and what do they want to do in life. To bring about K dimension must be a really, really hard thing to do. Thank you so much for your lecture. I think we have a number of people who have raised hands. I'll start with Harshad Bhai. Please unmute yourself, Harshad Bhai. Yeah.
Yes. Are you able to hear?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Vikas. I'm Harshad Parekh. I was a teacher in Krishnamurti schools for about 27 years. And I feel that it is easier to talk with younger school students than university students. And to, to communicate or to share teachings of Krishnamurti, it is better to have a small number of students and living together like a residential school, and we get a lot of opportunity to talk with students. And I had that opportunity to talk, discuss about Krishnamurti's teachings. It means how we do anything, because Krishnamurti's teachings is about how we look, how we listen, how we speak. Everything matters because it has to do with what Krishnamurti called choiceless awareness. And as long as this awareness has not come in our life, then thinking and feeling, they dominate our life and create many, many problems. So if I have to communicate with university students about Krishnamurti's teachings, first I must be very, very passionate about and very, very clear how, because the most important thing in communicating with students is the quality of relationship and how we ourselves live our life. Because I feel that it is not uh, the matter of communicating ideas, because ideas are very, very superficial, and one can get ideas like one should not compare, there should be no competition, and sense of responsibility. But unless it is done in everything which we do in our daily life, like how we listen to students, how we speak in the classroom. So I feel that only when our life is permeated fully with Krishnamurti's teachings, and we are very passionate, as you said, you are passionate. So when we are passionate to communicate, then we need to develop good relationship, and without that, very difficult to communicate. Just communicating ideas is like a very artificial flower. The real fragrance is in how we do everything in the classroom, and not only in the classroom but outside the classroom. So, and if you have a small number, then yes, it's very good to sit in a circle and first create a kind of silence, attentiveness, and then anybody can ask questions. Like when I try to do that in the school, Rishi Valley School with senior student, and if I ask student, can we read a little bit from Krishnamurti uh, a book, and then we discuss so that we have some idea of what we want to discuss, then students were saying, no, we don't want to listen to Krishnamurti. We speak from our own life. So I think one has to um, start with what is our daily problems in relationship, whether it is a fear of examinations or fear of teachers or a quality of relationship between students and teachers. And so there are many, the fundamental topic is relationship. And for that, after that, we can discuss anything. So yes, I think it must be very difficult to communicate with university students because you don't live together. But at the school level, for a teacher who is very much interested, there's lots of opportunity, especially in a residential school. And we used to have culture classes, and also I used to organize for students who were voluntarily coming to discuss problems of our daily life and the problems in the world. Okay, I have said enough. Thank you very much.
So let me respond and elaborate a little about how I go in this direction. Go ahead. So the course that I teach in B.Ed is called Conceptual Foundations of Education. So it's composed of 3 units. 2 are largely concepts, one philosophical, another sociological, though I don't believe in the distinction. And third are thinkers. I never talk about Krishnamurti in the first 9 months. The first 2/3 part of the course. What I talk about is, so let me put it differently. What I want my students to feel in my classes, one, that none of their questions is useless or any less important than someone else. That's first. Every question is important. 2, you know more than what you think you do. So in our system, the conventional system, students are in a way told that what you know is less than what your senior knows, is less than what your senior knows, and is definitely less than your teacher. So I try to make them realize that the class is building on their responses, and so whatever they say, no matter how small that comment is it is important for the building of the class. So often what happens is that at the end of the class, when I'm saying something, someone says, yes sir, I had this in mind. I said, if you would have it would have made the class a lot more richer. Third is that when you question, you are not questioning the person. So this separation from your identity from a question, I think that is something which, especially in higher education, people don't understand. So if you question someone, they feel that you are questioning me. So that, of course, the importance of questioning, that everything needs to be questioned, and that there are no final answers to anything. Another, I would say, rampant way of teaching is that I will tell you what to answer, what to write in your answers. I will give you one reading to be sufficient. I never give one reading to my students. I give them readings from where they can choose. And once they are in this flow, when they learn to accept, to question, when they don't take questions personally, when they don't believe in anything, when they start questioning everything, when they come to me and tell me, sir, we know that there are no answers, but how do we give direction to our own lives? It is at that time that I talk about Krishnamurti. So I think it requires 6 months to prepare them to appreciate Krishnamurti's words. I do introduce the idea of dialogue initially whenever required, but I don't introduce Krishnamurti. So I see it as this way. The conventional classroom teaching to a more open-ended question, as Socrates probably would do, to a more socio-politically inspired questioning, as they would do, to a more relational understanding of importance of community, cooperation, compassion, that Buber would do, and then the method of no method that uh, Krishnamurti suggested. So I see my students in these 4 phases. So I design their assignments in this way. For example, the first assignment, one of the assignments, and generally the first assignment that I give them is about right and wrong. I give them a reading which has about 4 or 5 different kinds of ethical theories, and they realize that no right and wrong is ultimate. I think this gives them an immense power, because social norms generally work in right and wrong way. And once students start questioning right and wrong and the assumptions of our cultural right and wrong, they become quite open. Second is about knowledge. How do we know? Ways of knowing. And issues and challenges of different ways of knowing: reason, experience, testimony, emotion, intuition, faith. So how each of them is limiting, and how we need to combine them to have a holistic understanding. And then about political questions like power, dominance, authority, autonomy, these questions. So I don't talk about Krishnamurti's ideas per se in my classes, but when I then taught to them about Krishnamurti and what he did, then they realize, sir, yes, this is what you have been teaching us. This is what we have been doing since the course started. We have been questioning, we have been resisting, we have been not taking things for granted. And we have been talking about responsibility towards each other. So that is something which I think gives them a sense, a realization of what of the power of Krishnamurti's ideas. But I can't even imagine introducing or including Krishnamurti in a curriculum in terms of, reading Krishnamurti and teaching, because our students are very intelligent. They can really make a map out of Krishnamurti's ideas to respond to questions of exams. So I don't want them to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Baniwal. We have a question coming from Poonamji. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Vikas ji, I would like to know about more. You shared the term is philosophical counseling. Yeah, I would like to know more about this.
Sure, ma'am. So this is one of the recent movements in philosophy. So philosophy is, I would say, going through an existential crisis these days. Everyone claims to be a philosopher, and whoever claims to do philosophy is told that yes, these ideas are good in theory but doesn't work in practice. And the kind of philosophy that works in practice, or that makes sense for practice, is analytical philosophy, which largely describes what is. So and also students of philosophy themselves feel alienated. I mean, they know all the philosophical systems, etc., but they don't know what to do with them. So philosophy itself is trying to reinvent its form. So many movements like philosophy for children, philosophy for teachers, philosophical counseling, or philosophical practice have emerged around the world. So philosophical counseling uh, is a reaction or a response to psychological counseling, where there is labeling, where there is an quite an importance which is given to medicines. So psychiatry, it's also inspired by anti-psychiatry movement, and it is based on the idea that, and it's quite cognitive and existential in that sense, that we have the power to give direction to our own lives. And the better we are able to think about our own lives, the better we are able to give direction. So instead of a psychologically oriented counseling where we are told to think in this, where we are told to think in this or that way, philosophical counseling believes that every person's ideas can be formulated into a theoretical framework, which can then be uh, compared with a philosophical framework. So you can have the coherence that a philosophy has in your own ideas, and that coherence will make you a better person. So in that sense, it's against labeling, against diagnosis, against psychological medicines, and against the dependency on the counselor as well, on the counselor as well. It's like you can be your own counselor.
Thank you. Thank you. Dinesh ji, please go ahead.
Are you able to listen to me, Vikas ji?
Yes, sir.
What I want to ask, our present education system has developed, given stress more on the intellect development, and they have worked, they have formulated a good system for that. But there is a less stress on the emotional quotient development and giving the idea to the spiritual quotient. So in your whatever you are talking in that also, there was a feeling from my side that you are still giving stress on the intellect development. But don't you think that there can be a good system formulated for understanding the emotions, feelings, how to tackle them, and that should be taught to the students so that all other problems, your relationship and all, whether what he has to do in the life and all can be well addressed.
I agree with you, sir, to quite an extent. But I must say here that I don't think our system gives enough emphasis even on intellectual development. So, for example, what I do in my first class is that I ask my students to take a stand on any question. For example, I generally begin with what is teaching, and I ask them, take a stand. Can you take a stand about what you believe teaching is? You are going to be a teacher. They are not able to take any stand on anything. So, yes, our system focuses on the cognitive dimension, but it doesn't focus on students becoming intellectuals, because being an intellectual involves questioning, it involves stand, it involves a critical appreciation of ideas. So our system wants our students to use their brains to remember things and uh, uh, retrieve them and write. So, and that is where I mentioned, that I ask my scholars, what is their pain? So one of the scholars who is working with me is working on childhood, because she felt that as a child, she had to go through a style of parenting that was very objectifying and demeaning. So she is working on philosophy for children. So the motivation is quite personal, but the engagement which makes the engagement just not intellectual. So similarly, when other scholars come to me, one is working on the idea of wonder, that how wonder can be given more space in our classrooms. So yes, I focus on the intellectual, but for me, intellectual is not without the personal, and the personal involves emotions. So by highlighting emotions vis-a-vis reason, I don't want to bring this dichotomy there. So I do in my classes mention that we have a very limited emotional vocabulary, that we are not able to articulate our emotions well, how we feel in any particular moment. But in my imagination, if you are an intellectual, then it's a holistic engagement. Then you don't need political to be different from personal, or reason to be different from emotional. So yeah, so I think
Thank you. Thank you.
that's how I do it.
Yeah. Harshad Bhai, please go ahead.
Yes. In this topic, Krishnamurti's ideas, but Krishnamurti says that ideas are very, very divisory. They create conflict. So the real thing which Krishnamurti is talking about is what is happening within our mind and whether we can see it very clearly. And unless, and you said that you don't talk much about Krishnamurti, and the students are very intelligent, but what is the quality of living in, are they really free from fear or anger or loneliness or boredom, or free from many addictions like drinking, smoking, because this happens very often in universities. So I feel that Krishnamurti's teachings are about how we live our daily life, and
True.
not the ideas extracted from the teachings and then trying to um, implement it. It doesn't work, I feel. One has to
I,
see it very, very clearly. Okay, and
I
how many
totally
students?
agree.
Yeah, how many students you have in the class?
I have about 35 students in my class.
How many? 35.
35.
35. That's a big number. Yeah.
Yes, it is. And I totally agree with you, sir, that extraction of ideas and creating a framework wouldn't do it. So as I see it, I am only an initiating agent. I initiate students into a different way of being. And I totally agree that most of uh, that initiation doesn't just happen in the classroom. So often students come to me to talk about their own existential questions, their questions about their own lives, how they feel in the class, how they feel in general. And I think these are the moments that I make use of. So class is just to instigate them to thinking. And when they come to talk about it at a more personal level, I think that is where I bring in the dimension of self-observation, not judging your own self, uh, not judging others, or writing about it, why you judge yourself in the way you do. So yeah, I must acknowledge here that it's not just the classes that does it. The students who have decided to later on work with me are the ones who meet me after the classes to talk about it. So yes, I must acknowledge that.
Thank you. Mr. Verma, please go ahead. Mr. Pradeep
Yes, sir.
Verma.
I am Pradeep. Thank you. Vikas, congratulations. I am overwhelmed listening to you. I could see a vital Vikas soaked in honesty and truth. The very fact that you chose dialogue for your PhD speaks volumes. Non-verbally in me, I could see that freshness which we talk about. I have a very few questions. First question is regarding the word which very often we use the word spirit. Could you say something about that? Then you talked about need of a goal. Regarding goal, the perceptibility of that, and the role of dialogue in the digital world. Third question, small questions. I was very happy listening to that. Thinking can definitely lead to something positive. Otherwise, usually thoughts and thinking, they have been reduced to such a run that people think that thinking is not good at all. So these are some small things which you will talk about. I request you to talk about the spirit, the goal, and the dialogue in digital world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for these questions. So, when I talk of spirit, I often clarify myself by saying that it's not about either Atma or the spirit in the biblical sense, but it's more in the sense of the essence of say someone's ideas, or even of space. So it's like getting attuned to a space, getting attuned to a person, and then catching hold of something which is not being said, but which is there. So if I replace essence, I mean, if I replace spirit with essence, I think it would be the same for me. So it's not in the mind-body divide. It's not in spirit and divine sense. It's not in that sense. So for that is spirit for me. The essence, yes, sir. Vijay sir, not just the spirit in the sense of approach, but in the sense of being. So approach is still cognitively articulable. So when I'm using spirit or essence, it is for something which is not articulable, but which we intuitively have in the way we engage with others. So maybe Russell's idea of sense, that you have the sense of it, but not articulable knowledge about it. So it's more, it's not just cognitive ability, Kamlesh sir. It's how should I put it? It's like when a child is around you, you sense the nature of the child through just his random actions. So it is that sort of thing. You sense the kind of upbringing that the child is having without the child telling you for her own experiences. So it's that elusive. So that's my idea of spirit here. Goals. Yes, I do acknowledge that having goals in reference to Krishnamurti sound reductionist, but I see pedagogically it as arriving at Krishnamurti's arriving at a stage where you appreciate Krishnamurti's ideas. So that sort of personal preparedness, I think I'm talking about. So when I say I have goals, that my first goal is that students should understand this and stop judging themselves, etc., etc. It is like they have to remove all the baggage that they already have, so that they can engage with Krishnamurti more freely. So it's the preparation. The goals are for the preparation, not for engagement. While engagement with Krishnamurti, I think their goals would be meaningless. So
Thank you.
that's,
Thank you.
and third is dialogue in digital world. Uh, so I recently had a conversation with a group of teachers from different schools about this, and what I highlighted there was that that education, healing, they happen in relationships. So dialogue in digital world can only happen if there is an experience of a relationship. Uh, so for example, even in my own classes, I think the batch that I have taught completely in online mode, I have developed relationship only with 10 people, because they were open enough to communicate with me even in the classes, have a general discussion about things. And also they revealed themselves during the classes, opening up during the classes. So and this I often tell my students that uh, you can to have dialogue. I as a teacher cannot claim that I had a dialogue. I cannot claim even today that I had a dialogue. It's the person on the other side who can uh, express or accept or share that yes, that was a dialogical moment for me. So so when I have classes, I can claim that I will have conversations, but I can never claim that I will have dialogue. So I think dialogue in digital world begins with conversations, but it needs both the parties to share and acknowledge that yes, it happened. But that relationship is at the core. If there is no relationship, there is no dialogue. Thank you.
I think we have just 2 minutes, so we'll hear Vijay ji and close. Sorry,
Yeah,
Dinesh,
just a
next
quick,
slide. Yeah.
yeah, just a quick thing. We're talking about once it is clear, word is not the thing. I think a lot gets clarified because the whole space is available. You have also talked of pauses, and and you have also tried to distinguish between, I mean, use the word pointer. I think pointer is often a better word because idea gets crystallized, and that's where the whole dichotomy between idea and then the implementation and applying it. Whereas there's a certain flow, and pointer, somehow initiate you into the actual flow of things. So, and as regards spirit, yes, I mean, that was, uh, approach I meant in the sense of, exploration. When you have approach is explorative and looking afresh at things, and again being ready, each time being ready to look afresh at things. So that spirit you do, that spirit is not, you don't even have to use, take anybody's name. I mean, I remember when I taught at JNU subject of translation, and I never used this word, but I know that light was there, that questioning, and that, in fact, the very first class I made, I think most of the time students would talk about how they perceive translation, what has been their experience of it, what notions they carry with them, and this was all brought out. And that's how first class, this was very different for them, and they also found somehow connected very passionately to this, that this is a very different way of going about it. So in any subject, when there is questioning happening and it's also your own, you are raking through your brain and bringing out whatever you are familiar with, and then that is being put, brought in the common space and shared. So there, it makes everybody participate very differently, and that is the spirit. So somewhere that light was there. It was never the word there. So, and for years, in fact, I remember I never have felt any need to take the name. I started using the name Krishnamurti probably after I went to the Rajghat or to looking for school for my children. But this was all there, and it was somewhere, showing, accompanying you, whatever you did, wherever you were, in whatever interaction you were. This was like at the background, in the spirit of questioning, uh, looking at things afresh. So that, I think, that is the spirit that can go with you, and there's no need, and no need for any name basically. Yeah. So I end there.
Thank you.
Sorry, I
Thank
may
you
have
so
taken a
much.
little more time.
No, it's perfectly all right. Thank you so much, Chabra Sahab. I think we have come to the end of our program now. And I want to announce next Sundays we have Michael Mendiza. Next Sunday, he is going to talk about living the teachings. So to accommodate his time, he is in the East Coast in USA. We'll have the dialogue session at 10 a.m. You're all welcome to join us. And I want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Baniwal for being with us. Thank you so much, sir. It was really a pleasure hearing you and your experience. Maybe we'll have you once again sometimes in future. Thank you so much.
Very much, sir.
Thank you, Dubey. Thank you very
Thank,
much.
thank you. Thank you.
Please take a note of time, 10 a.m. next Sunday. Thank you. Kamlesh, you can now close it.
Yes, sir. Okay. Thanks.